Thanks for joining us at Right On Replicas, where we're proud to bring you the best scale model kit reviews on the planet. Are you ready to grumble? Because this review covers the Grrrumbler Street Jeep, which is a custom version released on the heels of a number of other versions of this kit. MPC's made it as Hogan's Heroes Jeep, a Bushwhacker, and a Trailblazer. And this was released sometime in the 70s, so it's a vintage kit, but you can still find them out there. And it's an MPC kit number 0708 and 1/25th scale. It's got about 98 pieces, and it's made for the intermediate modeler. The pieces are molded in metallic gray, chrome, clear, black vinyl tires, and has water slide decals. The instructions are pretty easy to follow, and when you're done, the kit will be about 5 1/4 inches long, 2 3/4 inches wide, and 2 3/4 inches high. Here are the contents of this kit. I call it my version of the open box review. I opened the box and there were all the parts. Now we're going to show you how to build the parts. And if you follow along, you'll find that for the most part we're using either tube glue or liquid model cement, sometimes some white glue or clear glue for the windows, and occasionally some super glue for the fragile parts. But remember to always heed the manufacturer's safety and use guidelines when you see or hear of any of the products used in the review. Here are the decals for the kit, and as you can see, they're very colorful. The register is good, and I suggest that you use some of the aftermarket setting solution to let some of those parts conform to the contours of the kit and stick to the body well. We'll start our construction with the engine, and we'll put the two halves of the engine block together. Now it's painted a gloss orange color, and the transmission is aluminum. The oil pan and the exhaust manifold are then attached to the engine assembly. I want to remind you too, always remove any of the plating, the chrome plating from any of the parts, or even paint for that matter, to the pieces where you want to glue them together, or the glue won't bond properly. You can get these parts out of the kit, and the alternator gets attached to the belt assembly, and they're painted flat black. Now the belt assembly can be glued to the engine assembly, and the fan then is attached to the belt assembly at the front of the motor. You'll get an option for either a single or dual carburetor setup, and I used the dual carburetor setup version, so both of those are then attached to the intake manifold, and the air cleaner is attached to the top of the carburetors. Now the intake manifold assembly can be glued to the top of the engine. As this kit's about 40 years old, so you'll find some flash on it. Make sure that you clean that up so that you get a good square connection when you put those pieces together at that point, and that they look nice. So go ahead, use your hobby knife and clean them up and sand them smooth. And now, as you can see, the orientation here, the parts are assembled and then added to the transmission and painted aluminum color as well. Now find these pieces from the kit, and we're going to strip the chrome off the chrome pieces here by just putting them in a little bit of bleach, swirling them around and let them set for about a half hour. Rinse them off and they'll be ready to paint semi-gloss black. Then you can attach those to the right side of the engine as you see here in the photo. There's another optional construction here for the engine, and you either get a chrome cylinder head or a cylinder head that needs to be painted. And for this build, I used the chrome cylinder head, and I just used that on top. Part 39 is used only with the single carburetor system though. Now you can gather up the parts for the frame and some of the suspension here, and we're going to assemble the two halves of the front differential, and that gets painted steel and gloss red to match the box art. And then the left front spring and the right one and the steering link are painted gloss black. Now the front shocks are gloss blue, and the steering gear gets attached to the chassis before the chassis assembly is painted silver. The left and the right leaf springs are attached to the front differential assembly, and then that whole assembly is attached to the chassis. Now the steering link can be glued in place to attach to the steering gear and the front differential. The front shock is now also attached to the chassis and the left front leaf spring, and then you repeat the process on the right side for the second front shock. So you see here some more of the pieces underneath, and if you're going to use the stock exhaust, then assemble the two halves of the muffler and attach them to the chassis before assembling the differential onto that. The left rear spring and the right one are painted gloss black, and the two halves of the rear differential can be put together, and then the assembly is painted steel and then some gloss red to match the box art. And the left and right leaf springs are attached to the rear differential. Now the assembly is then attached to the chassis. And since the side exhaust pipes will be used here, the stock wasn't assembled or used at this time. And now we can turn the attention to the wheel assemblies, and the four inner rims and the wheel retainers, they get painted silver. And then there's an insert that must be carefully cut out of the tire before the tires can be assembled. Use a sharp knife, but be careful there. The inner rim is installed into the tire, and then the wheel retainer is installed into the inner rim. Now the outer rim can be glued on to the other side of the tire assembly and glued to the inner rim there. Do this for the other three tire assemblies. Gather up these pieces, and then the front and rear drive shafts will be painted steel color. The engine assembly is then located into the chassis assembly on the mounts provided. And then the front drive shaft is attached to the front differential in the front of the transfer case. And then the rear drive shaft can be attached in the rear. Now, if you're going to use the stock exhaust, you'd paint the exhaust pipes and then attach that between the tailpipe and the manifold. And for this build, however, the side pipes are going to be used, so we didn't use the stock exhaust pipe. And now we can go ahead and assemble the wheel assemblies to the chassis on the spindles, the hubs there. And then, as you can see, we're at the point where we have a rolling chassis on which to build the rest of the model. The two front seats then I painted light gray, and I detailed that with some flat black for the belts. As you can see, that's a raised feature there molded into the seat. So if you're going to use the seat decals, which I didn't use, you would have to cut them out around the seat belts after it's installed. No easy task. It would have been easier had they added just a decal for the seat belts here. Before installing the seats into position, I went ahead and sprayed the body with some metallic silver, and then once that was dried, I glued the seats in place. Gather up the parts that you see here, the shifters, the firewall, etc. And we spray the firewall with some metallic silver, and then it got detailed with a little semi-gloss black, and the pedal assemblies are also semi-gloss black, and then they get attached to the firewall, and the shifter and the transfer case are then glued into position in the body. Now the firewall assembly can be installed into the body assembly. Locate these parts out of the kit there. There's the instrument panel and the cowl, and we're going to spray those metallic silver as well. The dashboard then is attached to part number 25, and then the dashboard assembly is attached to the body assembly. Find the battery in the kit, and it gets painted gloss white with some Tester's blue detailing, and it gets installed into the body there on the right side. Now we're going to attach the body assembly to the chassis. So locate the mounting points where the glue would effectively adhere to points on both, and then make sure you scrape any paint off and go ahead and use some strong glue to glue the body to the chassis. So get these parts out for the steering wheel and column, and those are painted semi-gloss black, and then the steering wheel gets detailed with little silver around the horn rim there. Now the steering column assembly can be installed into the body and attached to the steering gear, which is part number 8 on the chassis assembly. Now we can work on these pieces, and the radiator assembly and the windshield frame, I painted those metallic silver as well. And the windshield gets installed into the frame with some clear part cement, or you can use white glue. The windshield assembly now is installed onto the body assembly with no glue so that it can be operationally moved up and down. Now there's a gap between the bottom of the windshield frame and the body assembly that doesn't really seem to be correctable because there's no damage to the parts, but maybe a little judicious sanding here at the base might help. Now the radiator assembly gets detailed with some flat black and then installed into the body assembly. We can work on this loaner piece here. This is the upper radiator hose and it has the junction attached to it. And we're going to paint that flat black and then attach the radiator to the radiator and to the engine assembly as you see here in the photo. Now we'll get out the rear view mirror and it gets attached to the windshield there in the center at the top using some clear part cement. And there's an ejector pin mark on the mirror, but in order to deal with that, I just put a piece of bare metal foil over the top of it so that it kind of disappeared. We'll move to the front end, and the grill gets sprayed metallic silver and it gets attached to the radiator assembly, and then the headlight lenses are installed into the bezels. Before the bezel gets put into the grill, use some white glue or part cement for that, and then repeat that for the second headlight assembly. Now the front bumper can be attached to the chassis. Painted the side pipes silver to keep with the paint scheme here, but more of a chrome silver. And then attach those to the body. Now there'll be a little bit of cleanup for the parting lines. You'll have to clean that up. And you'll also install the one on the right side too. So look for the exhaust pipes, the side exhaust pipes there. They've got some flash on them, so you'll be able to find them. But clean that up with a sharp hobby knife and sand the parting line smooth. Now they don't go all the way to the exhaust manifold, so I just built a muffler system, a crossover that ran from the manifold to the side pipes and across each. So in figure 45, it's kind of a version of my homemade exhaust. I really just used some sprue, cleaned it up and kind of bent it and into shape, and then glued it so that everything was together like a real exhaust system would be. Now the box art shows the stock exhaust system and the side pipes on the completed build. Find the hood and the hood scoop, and then we're going to attach the hood scoop to the hood, glue that into position. You're just going to have to eye that up and center it so that it's in the proper position. And then we're going to paint that silver like the body, and then we can go ahead and install the hood assembly onto the body without glue so that it's still usable. Now use some caution here. The hinge pins on the hood are real delicate. So when you're putting that into place, make sure you don't bend that too far. Now here you can benefit from my going ahead and building this because there's a fit issue that you find you have once you've got everything all together. And so you're going to have to try and mock up this portion of the assembly with the hood and the grill so that you can see where it needs to be shaved down at the back or the sides by the hinge pins, etc., for a good close fit. So you can benefit from this build and fix that for yours. Now find these parts. We'll be moving to the back end for that detail. And the tailgate and the latches and the rear bumper support are all painted metallic silver. One tailgate latch then is attached to the body assembly, and then the tailgate is installed onto the tailgate latch without glue, and the other tailgate then latch can be placed on the other side of the tailgate and glued only to the body assembly so that that matches up and is still operational. Now the rear bumper support can be attached to the body, and the rear bumper then can be attached to that. The license plates holder is attached to the rear bumper, and the tail lights are detailed with some gloss red before they're attached to the body. Just to prove that this is a vintage kit, you can see right here it was made in USA. And don't worry about it though, it's on the underside of the roll cage plate, so you won't see it after it's installed. Now we'll go ahead and use these parts. The roll cage plate then gets painted gloss red, and then the roll cage parts, the bars, they're all painted tester silver. Roll cage bars then are attached to the plate, and both roll cage supports are attached to the roll cage plate and the roll cage bar. Now the roll cage assembly can be installed into the back of the body. It's at this point I realized that the rear wheel wells have some flared fenders, and those should probably have been attached earlier and then smoothed out with some putty. So here it is before it's completely dried and cleaned up. But go ahead and install the wheel well flares if you haven't done so already, but you may want to put that on prior to painting the body initially. We're going to use these parts here. It's a light bracket, and it gets painted metallic silver, then attached to the chassis in front of the grille, and the two lights then are painted silver, and then they're attached to the light bracket. Well, there you have it. Your model is complete, and this sassy looking street custom Jeep looks right at home on the shelf. It's an old kit, and there are some fit issues, the hood there, etc., and you may need to do a little handiwork with the pipes underneath, as I did, but when you get it all done, it's just a nice little head turner. I can see this going through a diorama in the mud, but it looks just as well going down the boulevard, hometown. So if I were you, I'd buy one and put it on my shelf. Well, we hope you liked this premium step-by-step model kit review, and so that you don't miss any more, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can do that by clicking on the icon in the lower right hand of the screen on all of our reviews, or you can find us on Facebook or our website, rightonreplicas.com. Thanks.